from this, I wanted to have a word on the evangelization of the world in the 1st century, in the 2nd century. We have talked about the world as it was, with the globalization that was well underway at the time. Let me go back to the slide. The police, they have something to do. Let me go back to this slide. Remember when I explained to you that there were trade routes with trading posts. Here, it's those red dots. Yeah. And those trading posts were run by Jewish communities. And so now you understand how the evangelization was made. It was very, very simple. It was like it was prepared, sort of. There were Jews all around the world, Jewish communities. They had a law to keep them from mixing too much with the locals. Mm-hmm. But there were also a proselyte religion, which meant there were Jews from the nation, converts. So there were Chinese converts, for example, in this community here, along with the Jews.
Yeah.
And those converts share the same faith. They were waiting for the Messiah. They were waiting for the fulfillment of the prophecies. And what the first Christian did was mostly going to those communities. So this is what all the apostles did, and the 72 and so on. They went to those communities. They spoke the same language. They spoke Aramaic. Mm-hmm. And they announced the coming of the Messiah. The Messiah is Jesus. And they announced the good news. And they had all learned it by heart. And they were able to teach it to the Jewish communities. Those Jewish communities converted to Christianity. They become Judeo-Christians. And the convert Jews, the Jews from the nation within those communities, also converted to Christianity. And for example, you had I don't know. Let's take a point. Let's go there. Here in Massilia, I know a bit. Massilia is a very, very old city in the south of France, which was called Fossé at the time, and not Massilia. And there were here, we have documentation for this, a very ancient Jewish community with converts from the south of France, from the Provence, the Provençaux. Mm-hmm. And so here the Jewish community was composed of ethnic Jews and Frenchmen, sort of, but France did not exist at the time. And so when Lazarus and Mary of Magdala and others, the other Marys, and came here to evangelize, they went to the Jewish community, they announced the coming of the Messiah, they announced the good news, and the Jews converted to Christianity, and also the French Jews, the southern French Jews converted. But those guys, those Jews from the nations, they had families, they had cousins in the south of France who were pagans. They had close links to the pagan culture of the time. Yeah. And so being both Jewish and pagan, sort of, yeah, they could then announce the good news to their pagan families, their pagan relatives, very easily. And this is why the gospel spread so fast among the nations, thanks to the Jewish communities that were dispersed all around the world.
They needed to have people that knew enough before they received the good news to be able to make sense of it and then share it. If they didn't have that pre-knowledge, as it were, they couldn't have converted so easily and then shared it.
The Jewish people.
The Jewish people
they had this knowledge because it was their culture. Yeah. But the converts, they also had this knowledge in order to convert and to become a proselyte, to become Jews from the nation. You had to learn the Torah, to learn the prophecies, and so on, and to believe, believe in them.
Yeah.
So this is why the evangelization was so efficient, so fast.
Yeah.
And why it was also a global evangelization. The whole of the known world was touched by the evangelization in the first century because of the network of communication and because of the presence of Jewish communities all around the world, all along the trade routes. For example, the stepbrother of the Emperor of China, who was a Prince Ying, in the first century, he had married an Aramaic Jewish princess, thanks to the links between the wealthy and influent Jewish trade communities in China.
Yeah, yeah.
And so Aramaic was spoken at the court of the Emperor of China in the first century, in the end of the first century.
That's amazing.
And according to the Christian traditions about Saint Thomas, he was called from India to China by the Prince Ying, who had a dream about him coming to give him the light.
Can I just, sorry to interrupt you, and it might be something you're coming to, but I had one viewer suggest that, this whole story of St. Thomas going to India and to China is all a myth. Have you got any evidence to show that he actually did go to China?
Yes. This is exactly what I wanted to show. We have evidence that St. Thomas came to China. I think it was between the year 65 to 68. He was there 3 years, and he came back to India, and there he was killed. There has been the rediscovery during the year 2000 of a huge sculpture, on a cliff in Kongwanshan, Lianyungang. Let me show you on the map where it is. It is there. You see, it is the arrival of the trade route, and it is a bit Luoyang. It's here. You see, you arrive there with the boat.
Yeah.
And Luoyang is here.
Yeah.
And so the sculpture is here.
That makes sense with something that I discovered a few months ago, is that they found ancient Aramaic lectionaries in an area in China similar to that place.
Yes.
So that makes sense now.
Yes. But the mainstream idea was that Christianity arrived in China around the 7th century. And thanks to the Nestorian churches. But actually, it came in the first century, and we have evidence of this in the imperial archives of China, which are very reliable, very well kept. Yeah. And we have archaeological evidence, which I'm showing to you here.
Yeah.
This is this sculpture. And of course, this sculpture was very, very well known by Chinese archaeologists, but they thought that it depicted the arrival of Buddhism, of the light. The light was Buddhism in the first century in China, whereas actually it features the arrival of Saint Thomas here and his deacon here and translator in China at the demand of the Prince Ying, so the stepbrother of the emperor, who wanted to know about the Christian faith, and maybe at the demand also of his wife, who was Jewish, and maybe she had some news about the new faith, thanks to the Jewish network. Here we have a very interesting picture of this guy. He was bearing a cross. Here we only see a sort of T, but here it has been erased. The Chinese authorities have used Karcher. You know Karcher? a sort of water gun with and sort of water blasted or sun blasted the sculpture.
Oh no, and they lost
Yes,
some
yes,
of
they
the.
did this, and lots of the details were lost.
That's a shame.
Here you see a stamping of the sculpture that was made during the 80s, and you see that there are much more details here than on this sculpture here, which is an actual photo.
Oh, it's a shame.
But we still have the stamping. Anyhow, what we have here is the figure of Saint Thomas, and you don't see it very well here, but he's wearing something on his head, a sort of band like this, which is the pétalon. The pétalon,
the Teflon, is it?
An ornament which was worn by the high priests and the chief of priests in Jerusalem.
Right. Well, why would he be wearing it?
Because he had a sort of rank of not high priest, because the high priest is Jesus, but of chief of priests. He was one of the apostles.
Yeah.
We have a document, the Muratori document, a very early Christian document from the beginning of the 2nd century, which says us that John the Apostle, also wore the pétalon. Because of this, some scholars think that John was a priest, but it does not make sense because he was too young, and he could not have been a priest. Should he have been a priest, he could not have followed Jesus, and he could not have been the evangelist. Whereas the tradition tells us that he was the evangelist. And so, since he wore the pétalon, since Thomas wore the pétalon, since I think Philip also, we have a trace that he wore the pétalon, maybe it tells us that during this early phase, the phase of this early Christianity, the apostles were seen as the new chiefs of priests, and because of this, they wore the pétalon like the chief of priests in Jerusalem.
The high priests.
The high priest wore the pétalon, but also the chief of priests.
Oh, okay. Chief priests,
The high priest was a very singular man. He had a very different role from the other priests and the chief of priests.
Okay.
But the chief of priests were the heads of the temple.
Yeah, okay.
The heads of the temple.
Yeah.
And they also wore maybe not the same pétalon as the high priest, but a mark, something.
Yeah. Wow.
Anyhow, this is a depiction of Thomas, and in the sculpture, which is a huge sculpture, it's something like 60 meters wide.
Yeah.
The character here or here must be something like 2 or 3 meters in height.
Yeah.
We have an image, a very strange image of a woman. Here, it's stamping, and here it is on the rock, and we think it is the Virgin Mary. It is Mary bearing Jesus, the baby Jesus, infant Jesus, here in her hands. Here is a sketching of the whole of the sculpture. You see here the image of Thomas, this one.
Yeah.
And here, this is the image of Mary. And we have many other images.
Well, can I just say, it looks like Mary is holding Jesus swaddled. You know what? You know, a newborn baby is.
Exactly. Yes, the infant Jesus. Exactly like in our Christmas tales.
Yeah.
But there is also something very strange about this character here. She is not sitting in the Chinese fashion. You can see, I think it's our left leg here with our left foot. And here we can see a thigh, a right thigh, and a right leg, which is over the left leg. This way of sitting is a Parthian way.
Right.
So this led Pierre Perrier to think that the sculptor who did this sculpture was not Chinese himself,
With Parthian.
but of Parthian origin.
Right.
And also, there is a tradition about Saint Thomas being himself a sculptor.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Here, there is a depiction of Jesus.
Yeah.
We think it is Jesus. And also here, Jesus lying in his tomb.
Genie Mac. This must be the
With
earliest.
his disciples, his apostles watching over him, seeing him. So
this must be the
Jesus.
earliest sculptures of these biblical figures.
These are the earliest sculpture of Mary, of Jesus, of the apostle.
Yeah.
And,
Wow.
and it's like a bit like a comic. It tells a story. It tells a story of Thomas coming to see the Prince Ying. Here is the Prince Ying in orange here in the sketch, here, and also here, and here, and here.
Yeah.
But beware that this figure here does not belong to this sculpture. It has been sculpted afterwards.
Yeah.
And it is a Buddha, a sort of attempt to Buddhaize this Christian sculpture. Another thing also very interesting, it's at this is sculpted on a cliff, and at the base of the cliff there have been some archaeological searches, and the remains of a church had been found.
Wow.
And a very, very old church, and its design is exactly the same as the very first churches that we have found in Iraq.
Right.
So it's also a very, very interesting topic. And this discovery is now it is not very known. It should have been a huge event.
This should be all over the news. I don't understand why this has not been reported everywhere.
The Chinese authority have no interest in it.
Yeah.
They are not very Christian friendly.
No.
But they should develop an interest in it, because it shows that the Christianity is not a Western thing that arrived in China with missionaries in the 17th century. It is a Chinese thing since its very beginning.
Yeah.
It's its very beginning. And it also leads us to think that there has been a Chinese, a Christian influence in the Chinese society since 2,000 years.
Yeah.
Because the Chinese church that developed from Thomas Venue had to endure major persecutions way before communism. 2 times in the first millennium, I think around the year 400, and thereafter maybe around the year 800 or 900. The whole of the church, the totality of the men, of the Christian men, were killed by the imperial regime.
Yeah.
2 times. Chinese thought that the religion was only a threat when it came to men. So maybe they were also a bit misogynistic, such as in Rome, like in Rome.
It survived through the women.
They spared the women, but they killed all the Christian men. Wow. And so 2 times the church has to start from scratch, and not from scratch because there were women, but bishops had to come from India to ordain new Chinese bishops and ordain new priests.
Yeah.
And so because of this, the Chinese church became clandestine very early. Way before communism, way before the 20th century.
Oh, okay. So this
so there is a tradition of clandestinity of an underground church, which is very profound, very, very strong. When the missionaries, the Western missionaries, came in China in the 17th century, they did not encounter any Christian, any Chinese Christian there. up until a century after their arrival,
They're
because
so
the
well
Chinese
hidden.
Christian remain hidden,
Yeah,
very defiant, very precautious,
yeah,
because they had this tradition of persecution. They did not want to appear in full light and preferred to remain underground. And they waited a century before coming into contact with the Western Church in China.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah.
And so this is a huge discovery. And this has been made by Pierre Perrier and a Chinese team, friends of him. But you see, when we were talking about the Chinese authorities, Pierre Perrier's house in France has been burglarized several times. His laptop was stolen because of this. He thinks it's because of this. He thinks the Chinese authorities were looking for his contact in China because he had nothing was stolen apart from this. And there is there are some elements which led him to believe that China was behind all of this.
Yeah, shame.
But it's not only Pierre Perrier and his team, because other scholars have also worked on this. And I will talk to you about an international conference where the proof of the venue of Thomas has been given last year.
Yeah.
This is exactly this conference, this international conference, a very interesting conference, which was held in Rome last year, in October 2021, by the Pontifical Committee for Historical Science. So I have here the leaflet, which is only in Italian, but the Acts, the book of the conference, is to be published within a few months by our friend Maxime Yevadian, friend of ECHO. Pierre Perrier took part in this conference, but he did not present something about Thomas in China, but about something about Thomas in India, because he's also working on this. And in this international conference, you had something like 30 scholars from all around the world who defended the thesis of a very early evangelization of the world, thanks to the Jewish communities, which is exactly what I explained to you. There was a French-Chinese scholar from the University of Bordeaux in France who talked about the Kongwanshan sculpture and the case for an early Chinese Christianity. So look for the publication of the book of the Acts of this conference. It will be very, very interesting. And it was all the more interesting that at the beginning, this conference was supposed to be a sort of disputatio, a confrontation between the Westernists, the one who thinks that the gospel were composed in Greek.
Yeah.
But Christianity was at first a Mediterranean religion, and the globalists or the Easternists who think, on the contrary, that the early Christianity is a bit like is what I explained to you all on this presentation. So
I presume the Easterners won the debate.
Or association who speaks about an early Aramaic Christianity and so on. It is it has not become a mainstream academic reality yet, but it will. Because you see, in science, truth is not about consensus. Truth is not about 95% of the people, of the scholars thinking the same. Truth is about truth, and it will emerge. And the one who thinks that, excuse me.
I was trying to say, maybe you can't hear me, but I was going to ask you, did from what you know of it, did the Easterners win the debate there?
Exactly, they won the debate. This
Yeah.
is the thing. It was supposed to be a disputation, a confrontation, and most of there were half of the scholars who were Easternists, and the other half were Westernists, and most of the Westernists came to the conclusion that they were wrong, that the Easternists were right,
That's
and they
amazing.
changed their opinion. And this is because of this, the Acts, the book of the Acts had to be changed, articles had to be rewritten, and this is why it takes time to publish the Acts. It should have been published already. For a regular, normal, casual conference, it should already have been published. But because of this, because of the victory, or the intellectual victory of the Eastern thesis, it takes a bit more time.
Wow,
It will change a lot. You see, this conception that we have here in the West, that Christianity was a sort of sect, a Jewish sect, a very tiny group of people that ununderstandably survived the first century and founded remote communities in Greece, in Turkey, and that those communities brought gospels in Greek that were supposed to be a collection of memories, of testimonies, and that those gospels in Greek spread anyhow in the around the Mediterranean Sea, and it developed a bit in the Roman Empire up until the 3rd century, when the Roman Empire, Constantine, converted to Christianity, and then it became the imperial religion, and then it spread, and so on. And this is this thesis has become very mainstream since the end of the Middle Age. It is nowadays the standard narrative in academia, in Western academia. But none of those scholars speaks Aramaic and Greek, and has studied the text, and has studied the Peshitta. And because of this narrative, it gives room to everyone who wants to claim that the Jesus of the gospel is not the historical Jesus, the actual Jesus. That the actual Jesus was the Freemasonry Jesus, for example, or he was the Islamic Jesus, or another Jesus which is not the Christian Jesus of the Gospels. But here, with those new discoveries, we come to realize that
there's no
the
gap.
Gospels are very, very, very close to the events.
Yeah.
And that we have a ton of evidence to show that they were not fabricated. There was no forgery. You are not forced to believe what's in the Gospel, but you have to believe that the people who wrote them and that the people who spread them strongly believe that it was true, and that many of them were witnesses.
So the Jesus of history and the Jesus of faith are the same, because there's no gap. Because there's no gap now.
And I think so. I could say it's a matter of faith, but it is also a matter of historical evidence, of scholarship, of science.
Yeah.
And we are living a very, very interesting time, because we have nowadays evidence that prove not that Christianity is right, but that Christianity is historical. It leaves always room for faith. You cannot be forced to believe that Jesus rose from the dead, for example.
Yeah.
But when you look at the how do you call this, the linceul, the piece of cloth in which Jesus was buried.
Oh, the shroud?
The shroud of Turin.
Yeah.
When you look at the Shroud of Turin, you have, for example, here evidence that something very odd happened. You cannot prove that Jesus rose from the dead or resurrected with this piece of cloth, with the shroud, but you can prove that he was in the he was in the shroud and he is not there anymore. That
Yeah.
he sort of came out of the shroud. He disappeared.
Yeah.
And we have proof with this shroud, even though there have been studies with the C14 and so on.
Yeah.
Even though those studies kind of contradicted the thesis that it was Jesus' shroud, we have now new studies, new evidence to show that the shroud is Jesus' shroud.
Yeah.
It is an historical evidence, but it is a very compelling evidence because what do we make of it? What do we make of this evidence that shows us, with the hardness of science, that Jesus was in this shroud and he sort of mysteriously came out without a trace? So
Yeah, and there, you know, I've seen a number of different studies, but like one study found that the image was formed through radiation, not from contact, so that something miraculously happened to form the image, and they've been able to make a 3D model of his body based on the image on a cloth, which would, I presume, would be very difficult to forge, to say the least.
yes, but you see, in science, we cannot speak of miracle. We can only speak of things we cannot explain with what we know, with what we already know.
Yeah, yeah.
And we'll see in the future. Maybe we will find other explanations, but as is the case, we have to come to the conclusion, which cannot be a definitive conclusion. This is science. There is no
Yeah.
definitive conclusion in science, other than in mathematics.
Could
we
you
come to the conclusion that it was Jesus' shroud.
Could you go to your slides where you deal with the different apostles and the persecution? I don't know if you covered that.
Just before this, I had another one.
Yeah,
a very simple one, which I wanted to show you.
Yeah,
it is a tradition of in the East of the three-lobed cross. You know this kind of cross with sort of beads in the end, sort of circle. It is a very traditional cross in the Eastern Church, and actually it has a meaning. This cross symbolizes the first evangelization by showing the directions that the apostle went to evangelize the world. So some of those went to the north, and they are figured with those three circles: Andrew, John, and Philip. They went to the north, to Greece, to the Black Sea. Some went to the east: Thomas, Bartholomew, Thaddeus. They went to Mesopotamia, India, China, Armenia also. Some went to the south: Matthias, Simon, Matthew. They went to Arabia, Ethiopia. And some went to the west: James, Peter. James the Just, he remained in Jerusalem. And it is so odd that this cross is very well known, but we don't know the tradition behind it. It's a tradition of what happened in the first century, and this fits the local traditions of the churches. When you look at the Church of India, for example, and its tradition about Thomas, or the tradition in Spain about Saint James in Santiago de Compostela, for example, the tradition in Ethiopia about Matthew, everything fits.
Mm-hmm.
But let's go to the slide you wanted me to show you. This one, which seems a bit complicated. It is a sort of chronology of different churches that were founded in the first century by the apostle in Rome, in Jerusalem, the Church of Antioch, Church of Nineveh, in the Church of Ctesiphon near Babylon, the first church of China, and one of the first churches in India. and it shows the succession of the bishops. I don't want to be anachronic because they were not the bishop title was not invented yet, but of patriarchs, sort of. And so the first patriarchs were the apostles themselves. The first apostle to come to Rome was James, for example, but thereafter came Peter, who was the patriarch in Rome, and he was martyred and killed with the Nero persecution. He was killed in 67. Thereafter came I must ask your audience to forgive me because those are the French names.
I think it's Linus in English.
Linus, Cletus, Clement, Evaristus, Alexander, Sixth, Telesphore. They were all killed. All killed.
Yeah.
Every one of them. Linus, he lasted only 3 years and he was killed, and so on and so on. And you see waves of persecution in the first churches. The Church of Jerusalem was especially persecuted. The first bishop or patriarch of the church was James the Just, the brother of Jesus. He was killed in 62 by the Jews. And then came Simon, who was killed also by the Jews in the turmoil between the two Roman Jewish wars. Then came Justus, who also was killed. Judas was killed during the second Jewish Roman war. He was crucified by the Jews.
Different Judas to what most people.
But he was Jews. He was Jew himself. He was an ethnic Jew, Judas.
No, what I'm saying is not the Judas of the Gospels. It's a different Judas.
Of course not. Of course not.
Yeah. Just
guess. Judas is a very common name.
Yeah.
There were two apostles who were called Judas.
Yeah.
One was Judas the Iscariot, and the other was Judas Thaddeus, which is also why they have nicknames.
Yeah.
To differentiate between them, such as Simon and Simon Peter, or Peter Simon. And so there was a sort of lineage of Jewish patriarchs here in Jerusalem, which ended in the 5th century, and the Jewish church, the Aramaic-speaking church in Jerusalem, was wiped out, and it was rebuilt. It started over from the Roman church, a Greek-speaking church out of the Byzantine Empire. And so the very first church of Jerusalem was lost. But the Aramaic-speaking churches remain, especially in nowadays Iraq. So the Church of Ctesiphon, which is today the Chaldean Church, and we see a lineage of patriarchs, a very complete lineage. Up until now, they have the list and the name of every patriarch, dating from Thomas himself.
And his name is interesting because in Aramaic it's Tuma, which means twin, because he looked like Jesus. That's what someone explained to me.
Yes, Didymos in Greek.
Yeah.
Those are very interesting people. Haggai and Mary, they were from the 72. And I don't know, I don't remember exactly. I don't remember whether it is Haggai or Mary who is said to have brought in Ctesiphon a copy of the Aramaic manuscripts of the 4 Gospels. And I think it is the Kaburis manuscript, which I told you about. It is a manuscript which was written or copied in the 8th or the 9th century in Aramaic. And it's in its introduction, there is a colophon, which explains the story of the manuscript and which tells that it was copied from a manuscript that was brought in Iraq or in Ctesiphon or maybe in Mosul, I don't remember exactly, by either Haggai or Mary before the destruction of the temple, so before the year 70.
Wow. Just goes to show you the Gospels had to be early.
They are very early, but when Thomas came or Thaddeus came, Bartholomew, Simon, they did not need written gospel
Yeah.
because they had everything, they had learned everything by heart. And
Yeah.
because they were in this orality tradition, here in Ctesiphon, people spoke Aramaic and were in this orality tradition. And so there was not the same need for scripture as in Rome or in Greece, for example.
Yeah. Excellent.
So it is very interesting to look at this also because we have a clear view of the persecution, the weight, the sheer size of those persecution in the early Christianity, and it is something also to consider when some people talk about the forgery of the Gospels or the fabrication of religion. You don't die for you don't give your life for a forgery or fabrication. It is also a sort of proof of or evidence of the authenticity of the Gospels.
Yeah. I was just looking at that diagram. That looks like 60 to 70% of the people got martyred.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
A lot.
If you survived, you were lucky. You know.
I don't know a place where a church was founded in the early Christianity where there was no martyrdom.
Yeah.
And whole churches were wiped down. In ECHO, we have conducted some research on the churches of Caucasian Albania. So it's not the Albania that is in Europe. It is Caucasian, Albania of Caucasus.
Is that
So,
near
Caucasian
Armenia,
Albania.
around that, near Georgia, Armenia somewhere?
It is in the Caucasus, just north of the historical Armenia.
Yeah, yeah.
And here, some scholars founded a sort of sarcophagus that was made with old parchment, and they managed to unstick the parchments that were stick together to make the sarcophagus.
Yeah.
And so it was a very tedious work. And they found a translation of the gospel in the lost alphabet of the region of the Albania. And so this is the only testimony that we have that there was something there, that there must have been a church in Albania, a very early church with Caucasian Albanian Christians that must have been all killed, because there is absolutely no trace besides this translation of the Gospels, of the Aramaic Gospels, especially into this language. It's a dead tongue. It's a dead language now.
Wow, that's tragic. But at least there's that to kind of remember them all by. Oh, that's so sad.
Yeah, that's sad, but some remain. For example, here you see a map of the bishop sees in the east. I don't think it's complete. There must have been much more than this. But what you see is those sees, those patriarchal sees, metropolitan sees, bishoprics. They are kind of distributed along the trade routes, which I showed you before. The trade route, the continental trade route, and the coastal trade route in India. And it is a clue, a sort of remnant of the very early coming of Christianity in those regions.
Yeah, it really goes to kind of point out the fact that, you know, when the disciples were sent out to spread the good news to the ends of the earth, they really took that seriously. They spread out to every part that they could at a rapid pace. So it's quite amazing.
From Spain to China, from France to Ethiopia, around the Black Sea. Philip was there around the Black Sea. By the way, the Caucasian Albania, let me show you this in another map. It must have been something around there.
Okay, yeah.
Is this?
Yeah.
Anyhow, I think I've come to the end of my presentation.
Yeah, so maybe
I don't
just
know
to
how to conclude.
maybe the implications of all of this. Okay, so what would you say are the top 3 implications maybe of what you've presented today? So why is this relevant for Christians today?
I think the major implication is that we have to go back to the Aramaic language.
Yeah.
To fully understand the Gospels, to understand its links with the Hebrew Bible, with the Aramaic Bible.
Yeah.
And it's a way to understand the Christian faith, to go back to the time of the apostle. I think this is really the major lesson.
Yeah.
And there are others also. The authenticity of the gospel and the fact that they are very, very, very close to Jesus, that they were the second step that I presented, the orality tradition step.
Yeah.
It was supervised by witnesses, by the apostles themselves, and by disciples.
Disciples.
Disciples. Excuse me, Mel.
Even I was beginning to get it wrong.
But it was supervised by the apostles, by disciples, by the women who were actual witnesses of the events.
Yeah.
And this is out of this tradition that the Gospels were made. And so it gives us a very, very strong evidence for the authenticity of the Gospels. Mm-hmm. And it sort of crushes the room that we thought was left to invent other Jesuses, mm-hmm. to invent an Islamic Jesus, a Gnostic Jesus, a Freemason Jesus.
Yeah.
I think those are the 3 major implications, the 3 major lessons of this work. But this work is still in progress. Yeah. We are still discovering new things, new evidence of the spreading of the gospel in the 1st century. It's amazing. It's amazing. We have evidence of the influence of Christianity on very early Buddhism, for example. The very first Buddhist texts were written in this region, in Sogdian, here. Yeah. And they were written in an Aramaic alphabet. Right. So there had been a contact with Christian at the beginning of Buddhism. So which came first, Buddhism or Christianity? And I think in Buddhism, we find, it's a bit like in Islam, we find a sort of deformation of Christian ideas that came first and that's changed the world and that were deformed and made into new systems, new religious phenomena, such as Buddhism or Islam, for example.
Like Buddhism did exist prior to Christianity, but what you're saying is that in terms of its written form, it got heavily influenced when it was written down in the Aramaic. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. But you see, we don't know exactly what Buddhism was like before Christianity.
Yeah.
We think we know Buddhism thanks to the work of Orientalists, scholars of the 19th century, but we have now discovered that they invented their stories. They invented a fake Buddhism for Westerners in the 19th century. and it is very, very strange. The Buddhism that we know here in the West is very different from the Buddhism in the East. And as for Buddha himself, Buddha Gautama, he is supposed to have lived 5 centuries before Christ, but we're not sure about this.
Really?
There are other evidence that point to a birth 70 years before Christ, which is not the same. Which is not the same. And there is this thing about the very first sacred text of Buddhism being written in Aramaic, and so having passed through a Christian influence.
Well, the first thing that strikes me is the focus on suffering. That is a massive feature in the narrative around Buddhism.
But
that perhaps
Buddhism
suggests some influence.
Buddhism is another response, another answer to the issue of evil. There is the Christian answer, which I think came first, which gave people the idea that an answer to evil, to the empire of evil on this earth and on us, on the human beings, that an answer was possible. Because when you look at the pagan cultures, no one had ever thought that it was possible to get rid of evil, to get rid of the empire of evil on earth, on the societies, and to get rid of the empire of evil on ourselves. I think it is Christianity that invented this idea. And some people took this idea in Gnosticism, for example, and developed it without Jesus. This is what we call heresy in the very literal sense of the word, which is a sort of deformation of Christian ideas. The idea that one could get to salvation without the actual real Jesus. And this is a bit what we found in Buddhism. Buddhism, as far as I know, is the idea that we could get rid of the empire of evil on ourselves by sort of mastering ourselves.
I heard a humanist talk about Christmas, and she was saying she quite was in favor of it if she could only get rid of the baggage to do with Christianity connected to it, which is very similar to that what you just said there. It's Christmas would be great without the all the Christian stuff to do with it. As if it could have come about without
exactly
the religion that produced
Christianity would be great if you can change Jesus a bit, and make him more like we want him to be. But when you see Islam is based on this idea. Islam has its very own Jesus. It's very specific Jesus, the Jesus of Islam. It claims to have the actual Jesus. But when we look at the Gospels and when we look now at the historical evidence, we are forced to the conclusion that they invented a Jesus that fit
different agenda,
their goals. Because the actual Jesus was too demanding, too different, he did not found a caliphate, for example.
Well, listen, Odon, on that note, that's a great place to finish. Thank you very much for the presentation. It's been an absolute goldmine of information. It's definitely going to change a lot of people's ideas about history and about the nature of how Christianity started and how it spread. It's been utterly fascinating. I think it's going to take me weeks to fully absorb all of the different elements, because there's it's a real 90 degrees change of direction in terms of my understanding of those early centuries. So fantastic.
What I could also add is to advise your audience to go to the ECHO website. So it is a French website, but when you use Google Translate or DeepL Translate, you can still understand what's in it, and it's a mine, a gold mine maybe.
Yeah.
And you will find many articles about all the stuff I've been blathering about.
Excellent. I've got one last question for you. When is the translation of The Secret of Islam coming out? Do we have a date yet? How close are we?
It's done. The translation is done. I'm just working on the final layout and the final proofread. So,
okay, so
it's coming. I wanted to publish it before the end of the year, but the end of the year is tonight.
yeah.
And I've got stuff to do. I have to buy some stuff for New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
So it will be
within a few days.
Within a week. It's within a week.
Fantastic. Oh, that's going to be brilliant. Because I know a lot of people have been waiting eagerly for it, So listen, thank you so much. And
thank you, man.
We must do this more often because it's been an absolute amazing.
There is much more to say about the gospel, the Aramaic stuff, and so on.
Yeah,
we could do many more sessions.
Yeah. I was saying earlier on in a post today that I said at the beginning of the year that was the year of the Aramaic, but I think it's going to be the decade of the Aramaic because of all of this new material that's coming out.
It is the key to understanding Islam, and obviously the key to understanding Christianity also.
Absolutely.